In this video, we will explore the different types of organisation structure found in workplaces around the globe. We will look at both tall, sometimes called hierarchical, and flat structures, and analyse the advantages and the disadvantages of both. In the previous video, we developed an understanding of why having an organisational structure. In the previous video, we developed an understanding of why having an organisational structure is really important for a business, and how this should lead to everybody in the business understanding their roles and their responsibilities. It ensures employees know who they are managed by and shows how the business is structured into different departments. Remember, an organisational chart is simply a visual representation of the organisation's structure. Let's begin to examine the different types of structures that a business might have. To all the teachers out there, show all of these videos without any ads and gain access to our growing library of over 500 teaching worksheets. Why not visit BizzWizard.co.uk to find out more? Firstly, we'll look at the flat structure. A flat structure, as you can see, has very few layers of management, maybe only 2 or 3. This means that the business has a short chain of command. In a flat structure, each manager may be responsible for a relatively large number of people who work directly for them. And as we have already discussed in our last video, these people are known as subordinates. This means that each manager will have many subordinates and has a wide span of control. A local retail business, such as a clothes shop, might have 2 floors, one selling men's clothes and one selling women's clothes. The store has a manager and a supervisor for each floor. Each supervisor has 8 sales assistants who work on their floor. This is an example of a flat structure. So that's about it. A flat structure has a few layers, and managers will often have a wide span of control. And basically the structure is, well, flat, at least in comparison to the next structure that we will examine, the tall, or sometimes hierarchical structure. A tall structure, as you can see, is, you've guessed it, tall, as it has many layers of management. This means that the business has a long chain of command, and directions are passed down through the layers from superiors to their subordinates, and so on. In this structure, each manager is usually responsible for a relatively small number of direct reports, maybe only 2 or 3. This means that each manager actually has a narrow span of control. They have fewer subordinates who report to them. It's worth noting though that this is not always the case, and a huge business, such as Amazon, would have a massive organisational structure with many layers. However, managers will also likely have lots of subordinates who report to them. Bring this video and over 100 more to life with fun, interactive games, quizzes and case studies. Why not try the first 25 completely free by visiting BizzWizard.co.uk. Let's introduce this video's main example. This is Lisa Price. Lisa is the Operations Director for Getaways, a UK-based luxury holiday retailer which operates exclusively online. They sell fantastic, memorable, and sometimes life-changing trips to those who can afford it. Let's have a look at the organisation chart for Getaways and see how Lisa fits into it. The man at the top of Getaways, the Chief Executive Officer, or CEO, is Ian Taylor. And he only has one direct report, or we might say subordinate, and that is the Managing Director, Neil Smith. Neil Smith has 2 direct reports. The Operations Director, that's Lisa, and the Finance and HR Director, Gary. As the Operations Director, you can see that Lisa has 2 direct subordinates, the Head of Marketing, Patsy, and the Head of Sales, John. Moving down the organisation structure, we see that both Patsy and John have 2 direct subordinates themselves. Patsy has Mavis and Tom, with Mavis having management responsibility for 2 staff, Pete and Sam, and Tom doesn't have any actual direct subordinates. Then you can see that John has Tony and Matt. Tony doesn't have any direct reports, but Matt has one direct report, Dave. As you can see, nobody in the whole organisation has more than 2 people who report directly to them. This means, as we have already discussed, they have a narrow span of control. Remember, if they managed many people, they would be considered to have a wider span of control. It's really important to remember these key terms for throwing into your exam answers. Now, to improve our understanding, let's look at the organisation structure from the perspective of one of the team members at the bottom of the hierarchy, Daryl Hill, who is a finance assistant. So, Daryl reports to Jane, who is the finance manager. Moving up the chain of command, Jane reports to Bob, the head of finance. But it doesn't stop there, because Bob reports to Gary, the finance and HR director. Finally, even Neil has to report to somebody, the chief executive officer, Ian. So, if we count up, then we can see that there are 6 layers to the hierarchy here at Getaways. This many layers would definitely make this a tall structure. Tall structures, as I have mentioned, can also be known as hierarchical structures, and this will depend on the exam board you study. The further up someone is in the hierarchy, the more important they tend to be. So in our example, at Getaways, Daryl is much less powerful than the Chief Executive Officer Ian. Now that we have explored the 2 main types of organisation structure, let's now consider the advantages and disadvantages of both. Remember, discussing these pros and cons, but most importantly the impact that they will have on the business, will help you pick up those all-important analysis marks. Each of the video courses over at BizzWizard.co.uk also includes an interactive business case study that applies the knowledge learnt to a real-world scenario. There are over 1,000 multiple-choice questions, each with detailed feedback, which tests students' understanding of the content. Why not visit BizzWizard.co.uk to find out more? As we have just looked at Getaways, let's consider what the advantages of a tall or hierarchical structure could be. Firstly, it can be much easier to check everyone's work is completed and to the required standard. This is because there are managers or supervisors at each level, which means that employee performance can be monitored, leading to improvements in productivity. There's a clear career path for promotion, and this may motivate employees to work hard, as the years of hard work and determination may lead to them climbing up the ladder. This increased employee motivation could help to reduce staff turnover and develop loyalty from staff. There are also very clear lines of responsibility and communication. What I mean here is that people know who they need to communicate with and who they should follow instructions from. This is beneficial because one individual trying to deal with all employee issues in a large organisation is destined to fail. Imagine if Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon and one of the richest people in the world, imagine if he had to try and deal with every single Amazon employee. Every issue, every request for an afternoon off, every call an employee makes when ringing in sick. If he had to check the quality of every individual's work, it would be a complete nightmare and simply not possible. Now it's time to flip the coin and take a look at the disadvantages of implementing a tall structure. Firstly, it can take a long time to share information from top to bottom, and this can be ineffective as there are so many layers for the information to go through. If the CEO wants the staff on the office floor to be doing something, they will have to tell their directors, who tell the managers, who tell the supervisors, and it goes on and on. This impact on communication can be negative because often it will mean mistakes are made, and this could lead to things such as damage to a business's brand. The next disadvantage is that often too many layers of management can mean that it takes a long time to make decisions. Let's say good old Dave, down at the bottom of the hierarchy, wants to change the way he does something because he thinks it will be more effective. He has to ask his boss, to ask their boss, to ask their boss. And this can mean that sometimes the decision on whether to make changes takes so long that Dave has forgotten all about it and moved on to something else by the time a decision has been made. The final disadvantage we will look at is that often a tall structure can be expensive because of the many management salaries that must be paid. These additional costs may lead to less money being invested in other areas of the business, such as improving advertising or additional staff development. There may be many other disadvantages we have not covered here, and as always, these will often depend on the business in the case study that you have been given. So, now on to flat organisational structures. To remind ourselves, here, each manager is responsible for managing more people and has a wider span of control. This can mean that people at the lower levels of the structure have more responsibility than they might have in a tall structure. This basically means that in a flat structure, managers need to be able to trust their staff, as it is unlikely they will always be able to constantly supervise their many subordinates. The first advantage of such an organisational structure is that with fewer layers, and therefore managers, there are less costs, less salaries to pay. This means that this additional money can be used to improve other areas of the business in a drive to take market share from competitors. Often, giving employees more responsibility will bring them more job satisfaction, which can lead to increased motivation and a lower staff turnover, meaning employees are happy to be doing their work and are less likely to leave. In a flat structure, communication can be quicker. If there are only 2 or 3 layers of authority, then getting a message down the chain of command to everybody in the organisation is much easier. This faster communication can in some cases mean that the business is able to respond more dynamically to changes when necessary. The final advantage that we will consider is that flat structures can lead to more sharing of ideas. If there are only a couple of layers in the chain of command, then a member of staff lower down may feel in a better position to go and share their exciting new proposal with the big boss. But we must of course consider the disadvantages of a flat structure. Firstly, managers might lose control if they have a lot of people to supervise. Unlike in a tall structure, where managers have a narrower span of control, if there are 40 people being managed by one individual, it's easy to understand that this could become overwhelming and relatively stressful. Using a flat organisational structure can mean fewer opportunities for promotion for staff lower down the chain of command. If there is only one supervisor position in the business, you could work there for decades and never be promoted. This can, in some cases, lead to reduced employee motivation and a high staff turnover. And finally, in a flat structure, there is a greater chance of mistakes being made. This is because there are fewer layers involved in approving a change. For example, if a manager in a flat structure decided to make an operational change, they are likely to have the freedom to simply do so, whereas in a tall structure, it would probably need to be signed off by people further up the food chain. This can sometimes lead to mistakes being made, and therefore brand images being damaged. As we have seen, there is no one correct way of structuring an organisation. Like many things in life, it depends on the size of the business, the type of work it does, and the type of people who manage it. To wrap this video up, I'll let you in on a little secret. Every business really has 2 organisational structures. The formal one, which is written on the organisational charts, and the other one, which is the everyday interactions of the employees within the business. This will not always match the chart, and sometimes you may find your greatest member of staff way down at the bottom of the structure. This has been the BizzWizard. See you in the next video.